Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Emily and today I finally have my January wrap up. This is coming a little bit later than I would have liked because this is now my second time filming this because I just have a lot of feelings about some of the books that I read this month and it was really hard to kind of succinctly talk about them, and I just wasn't happy with how I expressed my thoughts and feelings in the first go around. So we're trying again. Typically in my wrap-ups, I like to do them in order that I read them, just because that makes sense in my mind. But I'm going to try doing it instead from my least to most favorite, just because I think for the circumstances in this particular wrap-up, that will work better for me and just leave the video on a more positive note. So for overall stats for the month, I read 5 books in the month of January, which to be honest is kind of disappointing to me personally. 5 books is still fantastic. It's more than I used to read every month before I really got back into reading, but it's definitely the lowest total number I've had in a while. So I was feeling a little bit down about that. And I'm thinking I might make a video just sort of reflecting on how my reading has changed and just some thoughts that I'm having around my reading and all of that, and posting it around my 1-year Booktube anniversary, which is coming up later this month. So if you're interested in that, definitely let me know. I can do that. Of the 5 books that I read, I had a 1-star book, I had a 2-star book, I had a 4-star book, a 4.5, and a 5. So like all over the place. Had some highs, had some lows, and it was just, it was a weird reading month. I also read almost entirely fantasy with 1 sci-fi in there. While I obviously love fantasy and that is great and I don't really have any problems with the fact that I read almost all fantasy, I am definitely in the mood for some other genres, so I'm really looking forward to Contemporary-a-thon in February, and I will put up a TBR for that in the next week or so, or like next couple of days because it starts on Monday. Oh, Minnie needs some attention, so she's gonna sit on my lap for this. All right, so can you tell I'm stalling? Here we go. Okay, so my least favorite book, the 1-star book that I read this month, and actually the last one I read in January as well, was Nevernight by Jay Kristoff. So I'm going to try to not talk about this too much because obviously I did not enjoy this book. I can pretty much go as far to say as I hated reading it. However, I did buddy read it with Spencer from Common Spence and Jocelyn from Know You With a Book, who are 2 of my favorite people on BookTube, and that made it enjoyable. And so while I didn't enjoy reading the book, I enjoyed reading it with them because we all felt similarly and were able to sort of air our grievances. So I'll just say that up front. Obviously, a disclaimer, just because I don't like this book doesn't mean that I am judging you for liking this book or think it's, you know, inherently a bad book. So a couple of things that I really didn't like. First and foremost, I just did not jive well with Jay Kristoff's writing style. There are an inordinate amount of metaphors, similes, descriptors, just like over the top writing, like bar none. I just have never read a book that had so many words. Like obviously I've read longer books, but geez, this one just like, it was so chock full of just more than was necessary. And then in addition to all of the description and writing in the general like prose of the book or whatever, there were also footnotes that like were for world building, but I didn't find any of the footnotes necessary, to be completely honest. I stopped reading them after a little while because I just didn't care. I don't know, it just felt like if it was important enough to understand as a reader, put it in the main text. Like, I don't know, it just felt very disjointed. So that was my biggest complaint overall, is I just don't like the way he writes. It feels like he is just writing to be clever, and like I don't enjoy when I can sense that. I don't know. I guess I should give a brief synopsis. This is a story following our main character Mia, whose father was executed for treason against the like Republic or wherever they live. After his death, Mia sets out to basically avenge his murder and wants to become a deadly assassin and yeah, just get back at all of the people who killed her father, imprisoned her mother, etc. I noticed pretty early on that it had a lot of similarities to Arya Stark's arc in Game of Thrones. A girl whose father is like pretty important is executed for treason. She witnesses his execution and then flees the scene essentially and goes off like on her own. Finds like mentors to sort of help her through like this goal she has of becoming an assassin. Literally has a list of names of people that she wants to kill and get back at, and then finds her way to this, you know, assassin training school called the Red Church, which to me felt very similar to the like cult-likeness of the Faceless Men in Game of Thrones, if you're familiar. So I noticed that like really early on, and that really took away from it for me for whatever reason. I just felt like this is too familiar. I know what's happening here. I mean, at this point, there's so much media, it's hard to find a completely original story, but that one it just felt a little too close. Obviously, there are differences, but that was very, like, obvious to me. Oh my god, I've been talking for so long and I'm only still on Nevernight. It was also just, like, kind of misogynistic and sexist in some instances. Like, I imagine Jay Kristoff being kind of like, oh, look at me, I'm going to write a story with a female main character, and she's going to go to this church where they worship a goddess of murder because women are important. But then there's also an entire plot point about how Mia needed to become more beautiful in order to be powerful. And like, yes, beauty can often correlate with power in lots of societies, but just like, I don't know. I also hated gentle friend, that word. Just it skeeves me out a little bit. Overall, I don't like this book. I will probably write up either a Goodreads review or a blog review at some point to try to more succinctly put my thoughts in order, because I just don't want to talk about it anymore. I just like want this book out of my life. I already unhauled it. I just didn't want it. I didn't want it anymore, so I got rid of it the day that I finished it. Okay, moving on. My 2-star book still wasn't good, but I don't have the same like visceral reaction to it, and that was City of Ashes by Cassandra Clare. So I told myself I wasn't gonna finish reading the Shadowhunters Chronicles, and I still haven't completely decided if I want to be like really intentional about finishing it, but my library happened to have the audiobook of it and I didn't have anything to listen to at that point, and so I picked it up. Overall, I just felt like it was pretty boring. I didn't feel at all connected to the characters in any way. I didn't really feel like that, feel connected to them in the first book either, but I just think that Jace is the worst. I don't like him as a character. I think Clary, the main character, is really boring. The side characters just feel like pawns in a game. I don't know. I just feel like they are used for very specific purposes within the text, and whatever. It was overall boring, and I've largely forgotten what happened already, and I finished it like maybe 3 weeks ago, so I feel like that's a pretty good indicator that it's just not a book that I'm ever going to revisit, I don't think. But I am vaguely interested in the world. I'm not super into paranormal, fae, anything like that, but for whatever reason, I think just because she's such a big name in the book community, I'm interested in Cassandra Clare's books, and I don't know, I can't explain it. Nothing about the book is telling me that I should love it or read it or be interested, but I am. And that's that. Overall, feel very neutral about City of Ashes, except for the fact that there's like a weird little like incestuous relationship going on. Like, I trust that it is not actually incest, and that these characters are not actually brother and sister, and that somewhere down the line we're gonna realize and learn that they're not. But right now, everybody, including those characters, believe them to be brother and sister, and for some reason Clare is still writing them as like vaguely in love with each other, and they like can't figure their shit out, and it's just kind of, it was grossing me out a bit, to be completely honest. I have faith that that will change, but I'm still not okay with it. Okay, now to get into books that I liked. So the next book I have, the one that I rated 4 stars, is The Bear and the Nightingale by Katherine Arden. This is one that was highly recommended to me by Jocelyn, you'll give it the book. This is one that is hard to describe because I feel like even the description in the dust jacket totally does not do it justice and really give off a sense of what this book is about. This is a book that I literally cannot even describe because so much of it is just the feeling of reading it. Not to say that it doesn't have plot or things driving it, but there is, I feel like, a lot going on. Every time I try to describe this to someone, I think I make it sound more confusing than it is, but it's inspired by Russian folklore and fantasy, and it follows our main character Vasya, who has some special abilities, and in the middle of winter she basically just has all of these responsibilities and adventures that she goes on, and it's a lot about protecting your household and what is good versus evil, and a lot of commentary on like religion and who you are praying to and stuff like that. It's very interesting, totally different than I was expecting. I don't know, I thought it was more historical fiction than fantasy, but I think it leans more fantasy. It very much feels like a fairy tale, and I read it in the depths of winter in Minnesota. I actually finished it on a day that was literally -60 wind chill Fahrenheit in Minneapolis, where I live, and that felt very fitting because so much of this is about like winter in Russia and stuff like that. So I highly recommend reading it in the winter if you're going to read it at all. That made it so much more accessible, I feel like. But yeah, I definitely want to continue with this series. I think it's one that will only get better as it continues and you learn more about this world and all of these stories. So I can't wait to continue with this series. And again, so grateful that Jocelyn recommended it to me so many times, and I'm sorry that it took me so long to read it. Next up is my 4.5-star book, and that is Vicious by VE Schwab. This is my first read of 2019, and I have to say it started 2019 off on a pretty high note. This follows two characters, Victor and Eli, who met in college and were roommates, and both very ambitious, very much driven to learn and just gain as much knowledge as possible. In their final year of university, they both need to select a topic for their thesis, and Eli decides to study extraordinaries, EOs, which are essentially superhumans. Victor becomes obsessed with the idea as well as he learns more about Eli's research, and when it starts to become less theoretical and more experimental, everything goes wrong and they have to try to reconcile not only what has happened between them, their friendship, but also to themselves. I love VE Schwab. As you may know, the Darker Shade of Magic series is one of my favorites of all time, and I think Victoria Schwab is a fantastic human being in general, so I can't believe it took me as long as it did to read Vicious, but I'm so glad I finally did because it definitely lived up to the hype for me. I will say that some of this story dragged a little bit for me. I wasn't completely enthralled the entire time, but I think it's so creative. VE Schwab's creativity with coming up with these superhuman abilities for the different EOs that we're introduced to was really cool, and I was really into that. That was probably my favorite part of the book, but I also loved that I kind of hated both Victor and Eli, but I was also kind of rooting for both of them, but also rooting against them. Like, I still can't decide who I like, who I hate, who I want to win, or if I want anyone to win, and it's very confusing and yet somehow satisfying, because that's like an impressive thing to be able to accomplish, I feel like. Just, I don't know, I'm just so unsure of my feelings. I will say the side characters I really enjoyed. I think Sydney and Mitch were really interesting. I don't know, they added a lot to it for me and I really enjoyed that. This is also told in two different timelines. Present day, when Victor has just gotten out of prison, and then it flashes back to their final year of university, when Victor and Eli are studying these EOs and such. I love stories told in that type of timeline, so that was definitely a big win for me. Overall, just really loved it and would highly recommend it. And then my final book that I read in January, and my 5-star read, favorite book of the month, In an Absent Dream by Seanan McGuire. This was one of my most anticipated releases of 2019, and I'm so happy that I loved it as much as I did. I thought it was so good, and I just love this series a whole lot. This is the 4th installment in the Wayward Children series by Seanan McGuire, and it yet again follows a character that we met in the first installment of the series, and we travel with her to the portal fantasy world that she visited as a child. So the overall gist of the Wayward Children series, if you haven't seen any of my other videos, although at this point I've talked about it so many times, I will link my video up here where I talk about this being one of my favorite series. Essentially, this is a story about children who travel to different worlds via these portals and end up in fantastical, whimsical, totally illogical worlds, and it's very similar to something like Narnia, Wonderland, that kind of thing. And the first installment is all about children having to come to terms with returning to our world after being in these different fantastical places. And then this 3 books after that have all been set in different worlds. This one is very interesting because the world is very much about following rules, and our main character, Lundy, is a rule follower, but also loves to find a good loophole. So in her life on Earth, or in our world, she doesn't really have any friends, she doesn't really fit in, and then she finds her way into this world called the Goblin Market, and everything sort of makes sense. So the rules are that names have power, you must give fair value for everything, remember the curfew, and then I forget what the last one was. But the most important one is always give fair value. This book is all about exploring making sure that you are paying your debts, but also a commentary on expecting more from people than what they're able to give, if that makes sense. Like all the books in this series, this one fits so much into such a small page count and has so many themes and morals and such that just had me thinking for days after. And again, I love this series. Almost all of them have gotten 5 stars for me. I think this is probably my second favorite, maybe third, I don't know, which is amazing because it's still 5 stars. So I highly recommend this series. Seanan McGuire has said if you're going to read them in publication order first, but if you want to reread them, start with In an Absent Dream and then go to Down Among the Sticks and Bones, Every Heart a Doorway, Beneath the Sugar Sky. I really want to do that this year, so I may do that later on, maybe in the fall, because that sounds like something that I would really enjoy doing. All right, everyone, there you have it. Those are the 5 books that I read in January. Like I said, really all over the place, and as far as enjoyment level and such, but also very consistent in just fantasy. So I'm hoping to diversify my genres a little bit in February, so keep an eye out for my contemporary-a-thon TBR, and then hopefully a wrap-up filled with more than just fantastical stories, and hopefully no more 1-star reads. If you have read any of these books and have similar thoughts, let me know down below. I would love to hear what you read in January, some of your favorites and such. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss out on my next video. But until then, happy reading. Bye.